the women who are moving fast, the women who are taking action, the women who are creating results, even when shit hits the fan, even when they're having a hard time or they're sick or there's just things happening in their personal life or there's drama in their business, they're focused on why the fuck they're even there in the first place. They're focused on their purpose. They're working towards their clear goal. You're listening to the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. I'm your host, Jill Perrick, a business and mindset coach who specializes in imposter syndrome. If you feel like you're not as smart, capable, or worthy as you actually are, and that someone is going to find you out, then you've come to the right place. I went from being a struggling government worker, working my coaching business on the side, but feeling unworthy and burnt out, to making multiple six figures helping women overcome imposter syndrome so they too can sign clients, make bank, and have the business or career of their dreams. I am nothing special. I have a stuttering disability, ADHD, and I struggle with anxiety and depression. So if I can learn how to feel good enough and overcome my inner imposter, then so can you. Let's dig in. Hey bitches, welcome back to the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. I'm your host, Jill Perrick, and you guys, I get married in a week and a couple days. Next Friday, August 23rd. And when you're listening to this episode, I'm just a couple days out from being married. It's so crazy, and I'm obviously recording this a lot earlier, so I will be in full wedding mode when you are listening to this though, and I'm just so excited. And I'm so excited for today's episode about how to handle and share life shit, mental health, and other personal things in a way that doesn't diminish your influence. But before we get into that today, I want to invite you to apply to the Fraud Squad Mastermind if you're a coach or an online service provider who is making between $3K to $5K a month and you're ready to make $10K a month. There's just a different level of imposter syndrome. There's a different level of self-sabotage, of mindset, of regulating your nervous system as you're scaling to 10K months. I know for a fact, as I have done it many a time, and there's also more of a focus on unfiltering yourself and becoming even more authentic in your content, really showing up as the version of you that has a six-figure business, including refining your offer suite, getting really clear on how you actually want your business to look when you're making six figures, and when you're making multiple six figures, right? Because you could think to yourself, like, I'm not at that stage yet. I'm not ready for that kind of thing or that kind of business, but it comes at you fast. And the biggest thing that I have to tell you about scaling to 10K a month is it is so much easier than you think it is. First of all, it really is. And second of all, it will throw you for a loop in terms of your identity, 1,000%. When it comes to becoming a six-figure earner, when it comes to becoming even a multiple six-figure earner as an online business owner, there are so many instances of people that get to that level and then they end up self-sabotaging back to lower income months and they start feeling intense imposter syndrome. I had a client who she specifically came to me because she had like 5-figure months, things were great, but then she would have these really big income dips and she was just on the roller coaster, the income up and down roller coaster. And it always had to do with her own struggle with imposter syndrome because she would get clients and then she would feel so afraid of fucking them up, of not getting the results, of them talking shit about her not having enough time or space for new clients. And she would always question, like, okay, now that I have the clients, now that things are seemingly working, like, how am I gonna fuck this up? And she would always self-sabotage back down to low income months so she could then climb the income ladder again and almost be that like phoenix rising from the ashes vibes, but like not in a good way, in the way that like she thought that she had to experience something really low to experience something really high. So like I said, she would always self-sabotage her high income months and go back down to low income months. But when we tackled her imposter syndrome at that new level, and when we focused more on expanding her identity as a business owner, expanding her capacity to receive and hold on to money, and really stepping into that, she made so much fucking more money. She had her highest month at 22.5K cash, and she started being consistent with those 5-figure months back to back. She was doing master classes, she had groups. And the thing is, like, when you join the Fraud Squad Mastermind, I'm not going to tell you, like, you have to do this offer. I'm not going to tell you you have to do this or that. I'm going to support you in the way that you want to run your business. Like, I am not somebody who often does live events. I am not somebody who does things like master classes or workshops very often. And I make 5 figures a month. And you can make 10K a month doing one-to-one coaching, doing group and one-to-one coaching, just doing group, like doing master classes or courses, whatever the fuck works for you. That's what I want you to lead with, because I know how it feels to not be supported in the way that you want to run your fucking business. And I am not here to tell you how to run it. I'm here to support you in running it and to give you the tools to regulate your nervous system, to not self-sabotage the fuck out of all the success that is coming for you, and to lean into that success, more visibility and making more money, becoming more legit in your business. And that is our focus inside of the Fraud Squad Mastermind. So you can apply for that at the link in my show notes. You can join for 4 months and either pay $4K pay in full, $1,111 a month for 4 months, or $888 a month for an extended payment plan of 5 months. And you can apply, like I said, at the link in my show notes. Okay? Let's get into the episode. So today, like I said, I want to talk to you about how you can handle and deal with personal life and things that are happening behind the scenes of your business, and what you actually should be sharing and should not be sharing when it comes to those things. Because what we don't want to do is do anything to diminish your brand and your image and what your brand presents. Because the thing is, when you have an online business, I think it's really easy to blur the lines between what you should share and what you shouldn't share. And of course, I'm never going to say you shouldn't share this and this is right or this is wrong. But especially on threads, like I'm noticing people share things that, do your clients really need to know that? You know, like there was this thing where these like business owners would share like, oh my God, I'm at the end of my rope and like I'm going to go and like get a job and stuff. And it's like, you're a business coach. Like, why are you sharing this? Like, that is not going to do anything for your credibility. Right? And I'm not saying like don't be honest with your audience, but I am saying like pick and choose what you're saying. And like, is that really you exemplifying your highest self? I find that there are some business owners who really use threads to like complain and talk shit, and it's just like not the fucking vibe. It's like it's not giving like established, mature business owner. And truthfully, as somebody who has an online business, and I've said this before, like I would not be an influencer. I use my social media because I own a business. And some people I think come into the online space and that's not their intention. They actually want to be an influencer. They actually just want to share things about themselves. But they come into the coaching industry or they try to become a service provider and they get really confused between what they should share and what they shouldn't share. And again, I'm not saying you can't share certain things, because we always want to be authentic, real, totally unfiltered. But you also have to kind of run it through this like filter at the same time of this, is this furthering my brand and my business, or is this actually hurting my influence and the impact that I can make? So I'll say that again. I think that you should still be authentic. You should still be real. You should still be unfiltered. But I also run everything that I want to say and share through the filter of, is this furthering my brand and my business, or is this actually hurting my influence and the impact that I can make? Because, and you know, this is the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. And the thing I want to drive home here is you're not a fraud. Just because you struggle with imposter syndrome and not feeling good enough, just because you have these kinds of thoughts, like who am I to do this kind of work? Who am I to coach people? Who am I to ask somebody to pay me thousands of dollars for this kind of work? Even if you do have those thoughts, like they're extremely normal and they're not indicative of what you can actually do for somebody and how you actually can help somebody. I also want to say too that if you're struggling with something on the personal end, if you're struggling with something where there's something happening behind the scenes with your family or with your partner, if you're struggling with self-worth or even like anxiety or depression. I remember when I got diagnosed with having ADHD, and that for me was a really big realization, because even though I was happy to be diagnosed, I went through kind of like a grieving time where I was grieving the version of me that didn't know that I had ADHD, potentially even autism. Like there was this version of me as a little girl that didn't know why things were so hard for her, why she felt so different from other people, like why she always felt like she was like following a script whenever she's in front of people. I still feel that way, you know, and I thought that there was something fundamentally wrong with me until I got diagnosed with ADHD. And that was a big thing that I had to reconcile, and I've talked about that on the podcast before, but it took me a really long time to really grapple with that realization. And at the same time, I was writing my book, You're Not Special, which you can get on Amazon as an ebook or as a hard copy. So even if you are somebody who's struggling with something behind the scenes, it also doesn't have to mean anything about who you are as a business owner. And I think that is like one of the biggest things is people will take their personal life and they won't be able to separate themselves from the business, and they will make it mean that like they can't show up as powerfully, they can't sell, they can't do these things because they're going through something behind the scenes. And that is actually not a congruency issue. That is an emotional resilience issue. That tells me that like you're not resilient enough, and that is not me trying to shame you. That is me saying like there needs to be some emotional resilience if you're going to run a business, you know, because like there are always going to be things happening in your life, right? And we have to deal with those things while still running a business. So like I said, even if you are somebody who is struggling with something behind the scenes, it doesn't have to mean anything about you as a business owner and what it means about your ability to help somebody. And I have such clarity around that now that when things happen in my personal life, I can really separate that from the skills that I have. And I think this is really important to say, because when I had this question from my clients around like, hey, I'm having a hard time, what do I do? Like when I have to like get on a coaching call. And the thing is, you do your fucking job, right? You do your job. And I don't know how to say that in a very like politically correct, kind way that could potentially throw off some people who are very sensitive and who are like, well, you should recharge and you should rest, blah, blah, blah. And listen, I'm a bitch that likes to take care of herself, okay? I rest. I sleep in all the fucking time. I am all for taking care of yourself. But the thing is, you also have a job to do, and we don't want to be seen as somebody who doesn't follow through on serving their clients, right? Like there are a lot of coaches in the online space and service providers who aren't doing their job, who are using their mental health and their physical health or something happening in their personal life as a crutch, who are using the things that are happening as a crutch. And while I'm all for doing the healing behind the scenes, I'm all for regulating your nervous system, I'm all for taking time off, you also have to think about the fact that somebody is paying you a lot of money for you to help them, and you can turn off whatever is happening behind the scenes for an hour so you can show the fuck up for your clients and for your potential clients. And this doesn't mean that you're putting on a face. It doesn't mean that you're two-faced. It doesn't mean that you're oblivious to the things that are happening in your life. It doesn't mean that you're cold. It doesn't mean anything about you. It means you're doing your job. And I feel really strongly about this because the people that are unable to separate the two, they just have to learn how to regulate their nervous system. Like that's what it is. It's not that they can't handle it. It's that you don't have the tools and the skills to regulate yourself around the emotion that you're feeling. And you don't have the skills to separate the story from the emotion. And I've talked about this before in terms of like how to manage your emotions in your business. And even if it's not stuff that's happening inside of the business and it is actually your personal life that is affecting how you're feeling that day, then it's really important for you to be able to not create a story out of the way that you're feeling. Right? Like if I have an argument with my partner and I feel shitty and I don't want to get on the coaching call, I'm in a bad mood, blah, blah, blah. You can separate the emotion that you're feeling from the story and just be like, I'm just having a feeling. This is a sensation that I'm feeling, and that's okay, right? Because we're always going to have these things. We're always going to have things be happening in our lives, and that doesn't mean that your business needs to stop. And then what happens here is what people do is they create the story and the belief that when something happens in my life, that means I can't show up for my business. And then they have this belief, and then they're so afraid to go full in on their business, to do the work, to even think about having one, because they're so afraid of what life is going to throw at them. And this is something that I think is really important, and that is separating your current story from your purpose. And what I mean by that is even if there are things happening in your personal life, even if there are things happening behind the scenes of your business, you have a reason why you're here in this industry, and you don't have to get the two confused. Even if you are having a hard time, you need to stay focused on your goals and clear about where you're going. And even if it feels difficult, even if it feels like you're fucking trudging through mud trying to get to where you want to be, that's That's why we do the mindset work. That's why we do the nervous system regulation work. But the women who are moving fast, the women who are taking action, the women who are creating results, even when shit hits the fan, even when they're having a hard time or they're sick or there's just things happening in their personal life or there's drama in their business, they're focused on why the fuck they're even there in the first place. They're focused on their purpose. They're working towards their clear goal, and they're not getting caught up in whatever is happening in that moment. So an example of this is when you're having a hard time with the client. So I had a client that was having a hard time financially, but at the same time, she had a lot of blocks around being visible. And in terms of actually selling her offer, we did so much work around her offer and what she was going to say and all of these things. But when it actually came to the point of her showing up, she didn't end up selling her offer, and therefore it was relating to her being stressed about the money. And there was actually a situation where she defaulted on her payment, and we were supposed to have a call that day, and I had already given her an extended payment plan, and so I had already done services for her that hadn't been paid for. And I reached out to her and said, hey, I saw that you defaulted on your payment, so we will cancel our call today. And she was very upset about that. She was very upset. She created a story in her mind that I was just in it for the money and that I didn't care about her, blah, blah, blah. And she had a lot of stories about like money and how it was bad and people that do coaching are just in it for the money, even though she was a coach. And so on top of that, she created a story about why I canceled the call. So I actually ended up people pleasing and doing the call. And she even said something to the effect of, I don't feel safe that you canceled our call. So hindsight, of course, is 2020. But the thing is this is some kind of event that people would take and they would not go on with their day. They wouldn't feel confident about talking about their offers or talking about their clients. They would internalize it. They would get so stressed because they're like, what does this mean for the rest of my business? And this is an example of dealing with a client and feeling like, oh my God, do I even know what I'm doing? This client has thoughts about me, blah, blah, blah. It's like for some people, it's their worst nightmare. And for especially somebody who is a people pleaser and those of us who hate being disliked, her calling me out in that kind of way really threw me off. However, because I had the tools, because I was very focused on my purpose that I had, I knew who I was at the core of it. I got like a little bit dysregulated when she said these things to me. So I took a step back. I did some EFT tapping. I did some journaling. I had a conversation with a coaching friend to kind of come back to regulation. And I was able to get on the call with her and to coach her. I was able to see the event neutrally, and I was still able to show up and sell that day because I didn't let myself get caught up in the story that I definitely could have got caught up in, right? Because when somebody says something about our character and says something about what they believe about us because of our behavior, that is like the worst thing in the world to somebody who is supposed to be like a healer, right? And people have a really hard time being judged, misunderstood, and perceived in a certain way that you really don't want to be perceived. And that for me at the time was very triggering, and it led me to being taken advantage of. And that's how that situation kind of felt. But it all worked out. It's totally fine. I'm just sharing this with you because I think it's really important for me to tell you that the reality of running a successful business and actually working with clients and working with other humans in their humanness, it's not always sunshine and rainbows. This was a couple years ago now, and I definitely have a different perspective on that situation. It helped me solidify even more of my boundaries and how I did extended payment plans. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because when you're so focused on your purpose, when you're rooted in your identity of who you are, nothing can shake you. And even though this wasn't something that was happening in my personal life, it was still something that shook my identity. It shook my worldview a little bit, and I had to figure out how to be a business owner and how to show up for my business even while having these conflicting emotions. Because even though I told you I had my tools, right? I had my nervous system tools, I did my EFT tapping, I journaled, I talked to a friend about it, so I was able to verbally process what had happened. And those things were so important because if I didn't have them, I would have been even further triggered, dysregulated, and it really could have affected how I showed up that day, how I showed up for the rest of the week. Do you see what I'm saying? So that emotional resilience is huge. Now let's talk about speaking from healed scars and not sensitive wounds. I've talked about this lots of times on the podcast before, but if you are newer here, back in 2020, my childhood home burned down. And at the time, my parents were living there, and so was my sister because it was COVID and she had moved home for the summer. And luckily, nobody was hurt in the fire except for our cat. He did pass away. He was 15 years old. It was really sad. But the entire house burned down. Like, it was not salvageable. It got completely torn down. And then my sister had to come live with me because my parents had to go live with my grandparents. My fiance was home because of COVID. He also had a bad back. I was working full-time for the government. I was stressed about money. I was also experiencing like the biggest year ever in my business. So I was working the 2 jobs. I was getting diagnosed with ADHD. Like, holy shit, everything was fucking happening at the same time. And what happened for me is I found myself really leaning on emotional eating because I didn't have a lot of time or freedom because of like my full-time job, my sister moving in with us, all of these things, right? And then we got kicked out of the rental house that we were staying in because they sold the house. We had to frantically look for somewhere to live, which we were able to find a great spot, and we're still here now. I love it. And all this time, like, I was launching, I was selling my offers, I was working with clients, and there was just a lot going on. But at the same time, I was working on my healing as well. It was when I started to get into Reiki and breath work and all of these other things. And thank God I had those tools, and I was able to heal a lot of things around the emotional eating, around everything that was going on, because I also had these tools that not only positively impacted the business, but also positively impacted my personal life, right? And so I was experiencing like a lot of things because I was making a lot of money in business. I was also being rejected a lot, and I heard a lot of no's, and I was launching offers, and some things were going good and some things weren't, right? And then in 2022, I drove for Uber Eats because my income had gone down. But the important thing here that I want to say about these certain events is I was not spilling all of this all over social media. I was doing the work behind the scenes and knowing that, like, okay, if there was something that I was insecure about, that I was working through, etc., I'm going to share that when I can feel neutral about the event and when I can talk about it in a way that feels really good to talk about, instead of just being like, I'm just sharing this to be transparent, right? I was being intentional about what I was doing because behind the scenes, I was supporting myself, right? Like, behind the scenes, I was doing all the things that I could do to support myself during a really difficult time. And again, the same thing with back in the beginning of 2022 when I had to drive for Uber Eats for a month. It felt like the longest month of my life, honestly. But like, I was very used to making 5 figures a month, like 10K, 13K, 15K, and my income ended up going down because of a confidence dip. I've talked about that on the pod before. But, you know, I still was showing up. I was still showing up and doing the work. And when it comes to that experience about driving for Uber Eats for a month, like, I didn't talk about it at the time because I didn't feel good about talking about it. Like, it didn't feel congruent for me to talk about that at that time, and I felt a lot of shame and imposter syndrome about it. So I made a conscious choice to not talk about it until I was able to like talk about it neutrally and really share the message and the meaning behind it. And I'm so glad that I did, because even at the time when I did share about it a year later, like, I was still cleaning up a lot of shit. I was still really like cleaning up my offer suite and figuring out like what direction I was going, and I was making pretty good moolah again, but like not what I'm making now, you know what I mean? So like, it really took some time for me to rebound there, but I could talk about it from a healed place. I could talk about it and like share the lesson, and instead of feeling triggered and being like, oh, I need to be authentic with my audience, like, and like truthfully, like I was still hitting like 3K, 4K, 5K a month during that time. But because of the expenses that I had and everything, I felt like a failure. And it felt like, oh my God, what the fuck am I doing? I've been doing this for years now. Things have been going so good before. What the fuck is happening now? And I can really speak from that place. And I really do think that I was supposed to have that experience of driving for Uber Eats and like hitting rock bottom, even though it was definitely not rock bottom, but it was enough for me to like learn the lessons that I needed to learn. And I remember being in the car driving for Uber Eats and thinking to myself, I can't wait to talk about this when things are good again. And I feel really confident in what I'm doing now. And like things have never been better in my business, with my offer suite, with my clients. And I feel so good about everything. And I know that I also did the fucking work to get here, right? And still, even during that time when I felt imposter syndrome and shame around having to drive for Uber Eats, it didn't mean anything about my ability to help other people. My clients were getting insane results regardless. It didn't mean anything about my education, about the certification that I had, the experience that I had. It literally meant nothing. And my clients were making like 10K to 12K months. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? And that is how I knew, like, it is so separate in terms of like what's happening for you and what you can do for clients, right? So like now that things are so much better, and like I was even sharing about this as things were improving, but the point of me sharing all of this, like the biggest point of this is that like I really had to learn that my skills and my capabilities were so separate from what I could do for my clients and the work that I was doing. And I also was like, I feel so good about sharing this during a time where I can see it neutrally and not like just talking about it to talk about it in the interest of being transparent. Like it felt more authentic to me to share when I could glean the lesson from it. And I just want you to remember that even if you're having a hard time, even if something is going on behind the scenes, it doesn't define you. It doesn't mean anything about your future, your skills. And sometimes we have to do the healing shit and do stuff behind the scenes and do whatever we need to do to then show up and do our job. And that's how I feel about creating content. That's how I feel about showing up and selling. That's how I feel about working with my clients. Like, I want to show my audience that I'm here for the long haul, even through hard times, and that I'm somebody who is reliable. I'm somebody who's consistent, and you can trust that when you invest in working with me, you're going to get what you fucking pay for. And I feel really confident about that, and I feel really sure about that, and going through the hardships that I have, and I'm sure there's a lot more to come. Knock on wood. I'm sure there's a lot more to come. And still being able to run my business and just show up for clients. Like, I'm so glad that I've had some of these experiences that I've had, because I know that even if something happens, I'm going to be able to handle it. And I didn't always have that feeling before, you know? And don't be afraid of this happening, because you're going to learn how resilient you are and how strong you are. And even if there has been times where you kind of let business fall to the wayside during a hard time that you're having personally, like, you don't have to shame yourself for that. You can learn from it, and you don't have to make yourself feel bad about that. And some people really do, and they say, see, this is why I don't deserve success. I'm inconsistent, blah, blah, blah. But you had your reasons, and you just didn't have the tools that you can have to support you during that time. Whether it's a death in the family, whether it's something difficult like a house fire, your sister having to move in with you, whether you're experiencing an income dip or financial struggles and it's making you feel like shit about your own business, your skills and your capabilities are so separate from your current situation, and you're not going to get to your future success by harping on your current situation. You're not going to get out of whatever situation you're in by allowing yourself to believe the stories that your brain is telling you about that situation, and to tell yourself that there is no hope, that this situation is never going to end, that it means something about you and your worthiness, or that it means something about you and your business. Like, that doesn't have to be the case. You can choose something different. And at the same time, what we don't want to do is to lean on your excuses as a crutch, because instead use them as reasons as to why you're a fucking badass, right? Like, even if things are going on, even if you're having a hard time personally, or you're having an issue in your business or something is starting to like trigger your imposter syndrome, you're having a difficult time with a client, you are more resilient than all of these things. And all of these tiny experiences or big experiences that you're having are just helping you build that resilience and helping you realize that you can run this business and you can do all of the things, even with stuff happening in the background. I've always been somebody who's been afraid to have kids because when I started the business and realized like how much time it took up and all that stuff, I had a real fear about having children and my business struggling because of it and blah, blah, blah. And as I've gotten older, I've started to really improve like on how I do things and my systems and everything like that. And kids are coming up in the next couple of years. And I've just been able to solve the problems because I've started coming up against other hardships and things that take up my time. And it doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that like if you have kids and you're running an online business, like that is still fucking amazing. And I'm so proud of you. And I'm sure it's very, very difficult. And I fully acknowledge it's not going to be easy, but I'm not afraid to do it anymore because I'm just like, I'll deal with it and it will be okay. And I know how to separate what's going on in my personal life from the skills that I have. So these are all things that I want you to think about in terms of like, am I trying to speak from experiences that I haven't healed? Am I like subtly damaging my influence or my impact for the sake of being transparent? But there is a difference between transparency and being vulnerable. When you're being transparent, you're just sharing everything just to share it. And when you're being vulnerable, you're sharing with intention. And this doesn't mean that you sharing personal hardships on your business page is calculated. What I'm saying is that, is there an intention behind it? Because if there is an intention behind it, like this is something that your potential clients can relate to or they can learn from, something that's going to create a connection between you and your audience, right? Like hence me sharing with you that experience with the client and sharing the instance of the house fire, or when I talk about having ADHD and struggling with my mental health, like anxiety and depression. I also have a speech disability, and I've heard from tons of people about how even though they don't have a speech disability, they really feel the things that I say when I talk about it. So it's intentional, me sharing those things. It's not calculated. It's intentional about me being like, I know that this doesn't have to stand in the way of the success that I have. And I also know that people can really relate to it. So I want to be that leader who says like, you can do things even if you have a stutter or a disability or something like that, right? Like I'm sharing it with the intention to connect. And at the same time, I make it really clear that this is something that it isn't a grab for attention. It's my real life. And it's simply just me stating the facts. And like, I'm a bad bitch regardless. Like I am doing the thing regardless. And that's the difference between being vulnerable and just like saying things to be transparent, to share them because you think you should, right? Like there are things that you don't have to talk about at all. You know, like I said, I was driving for Uber Eats. I wasn't talking about it, and I can do whatever the fuck I want, and so can you, because you are not obligated to share anything about yourself that you don't want to. So I hope this episode helped you kind of show yourself more compassion and show yourself that you can be so fucking successful and that you can be resilient and that you can take shit on in your life, even when there are things happening, even when you're struggling. And I hope that it also gave you kind of a little kick in the ass in terms of the fact that you can be so successful, even with ADHD, even with mental health struggles, and even with things happening, and to actually do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself, to emotionally regulate yourself, and to handle things behind the scenes so that you can show up like the powerful fucking bitch that you are, right? Like these things you've gone through or are going through, the things that you struggle with, they don't define you. And if anything, they make you more resilient. They make you more sure of yourself. And that is what I hope for you, because you have lives to change and work to do. So that is the end of this episode. I love you guys. If you're wanting to apply to the Fraud Squad Mastermind, you can go to the link in my show notes. Or if you want to join the From Imposter to Empowered program, you can also do that at the link in my show notes. There is no application for the From Imposter to Empowered program. You can just join directly, but there is an application for the Fraud Squad. If you have any questions at all, you can send me a DM at your coach Jill. I hope you guys love this episode, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. Head to the show notes to learn how you can work with me, where you can buy my best-selling book, You're Not Special, and how to get on my email list for free. Screenshot this episode and add it to your Instagram stories, tagging me at Your Coach Jill. See you next time.